Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, 5G Open RAN Deployment, sponsored by Tech Mahindra and Intel. Before we begin, I will cover a few housekeeping items. On the left-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, please type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Near the end of today's presentation, please take 1 minute to complete the survey that's open on your screen. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Heavy Reading's Principal Analyst, Gabriel Brown.
Thank you, Operator, and hello, everybody. Welcome once again to this webinar on 5G Open RAN deployment. It's terrific to have you with us. Thank you for coming. Open RAN, I think, as most people know, is a way to build and operate low-cost, scalable, and programmable radio infrastructure. And it's being adopted around the world in different forms and in different timeframes, but widely adopted now. And in this session, we're going to be discussing the state of play of Open RAN as of middle of 2021, how to meet some of the 5G Open RAN performance requirements. We'll talk about integration into brownfield networks, which we'll talk about greenfield as well, but obviously brownfield is the large majority of mobile operators worldwide. And also seek views on the timelines for Open RAN deployment at scale and across different scenarios. So once again, thank you for coming. As you heard, my name is Gabriel Brown. I'm Principal Analyst with Heavy Reading, where I lead our mobile network coverage. I am also your host and moderator for today. I'm joined by 3 expert guest speakers, all with deep experience really in Open RAN. And I'm going to just ask each of them to say a few words about themselves, starting with Manish Mangal, who is the Global Business Head for Network Services at Tech Mahindra. Welcome, Manish. Great to have you with us today. Could you tell the audience, what you do there at Tech Mahindra and how that relates to Open RAN?
Absolutely, Gabriel. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Manish Mangal. I head the network services business globally at Tech Mahindra. And part of my role includes helping our customers, which includes carriers as well as enterprises, in driving their transformation initiatives to help them create new opportunities for driving the cost of the business lower, as well as 5G becomes more and more enabled monetization opportunities for 5G. So I lead the team globally for the company, and we work with global 60, 70 plus tier 1 operators in helping their journey of transformation. Glad to be here today, Gabriel.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming, Manish. I'd then like to turn to Anil Bhandari, Vice President of Product Management at Altiostar. Altiostar, of course, has been one of the pioneering companies in Open RAN. Anil's been involved for, I think, most or all of that journey. So welcome, Anil. Great to have you. Could you similarly tell us a bit about your role there? Anil may be on mute, I'm guessing.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks, Gabriel, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Anil Bhandari, and I head the product management team at Altiostar. And my team is responsible for working with customers, understanding their requirements, and developing innovative product strategies. As Gabriel mentioned, Altiostar has been one of the Open RAN innovators. We started this journey quite early in the industry, and we have large-scale commercial deployments today for both 4G and 5G. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Anil. And then we have Adnan Boustany, who is a director in the Wireless Access Business Unit at Intel. Adnan, I happen to know anyone who's really in this space will probably know or have heard of Adnan, starting from some of the earliest vRAN implementations. So Adnan, welcome.
Thank you, Gabriel, and good day and good morning, good evening to everybody. So thank you for kind of having this session today. So as Gabriel mentioned, I'm in the wireless access business unit at Intel, which focuses on enabling both actually traditional RAN and Open RAN vRAN. Specifically, I'm focusing on the FlexRAN product, which is kind of the enabler for both Open RAN and for vRAN. In my role, I work very, very closely with customers, and customers actually include both like comm service providers and the actual vendors. Working with them closely to essentially enable their adoption of Open RAN, vRAN technologies, helping them through deployments, and as they scale their solutions from, say, early field trials to full-scale deployments.
Good stuff. Thanks, Adnan. Now, I know also all three speakers are very open to taking questions, so we really urge you to take advantage of that. You can submit questions via the Q&A tab on your screen here. Just in terms of how that's going to work into the agenda, we're going to have 10 minutes of kind of background on Open RAN and some of the system integration challenges from Manish at Tech Mahindra. We'll then move into some panel discussion and some audience Q&A for the bulk of the session today. On the slide here, I have audience Q&A 10 minutes at the end. What I'd really like to do is take questions as we go through the session, so we can have them at the appropriate point in the conversation. So if you do have a question, some really great experience on the call, put it in the chat there, and I'll have a look on the back end and try and work it into the flow as we go. And don't be shy, and don't be wary of being technical or anything like that. The speakers are great speakers and have a lot to offer. So with that, we're going to push forward to the first section. I'm going to hand the controls over to Manish Mangal at Tech Mahindra, just to take us through this opening section. Manish, please, the controls are yours.
Absolutely, Gabriel. Thank you so much. And of course, the topic today is very focused around Open RAN, which is it's a very unique and interesting topic that we're going to be spending time with you all for the next 55 minutes. But if I really look at the network as a whole, the journey that the industry has been going through in terms of virtualization and transformation is a big part of how we enable the network to become a software platform. And when I look at the end-to-end part of what it takes for network to become the software-centric network that allows the agility for everything to align with the way the rest of the industries has been working outside the telecom in the world of IT, for example, where things move relatively faster in terms of how feature functionalities get rolled out into the customers. RAN is one area that had been the last frontier, if you may, from an end-to-end network point of view, to turn that as a software-centric. And it's also the highest area of spend. More than 60% of the total spend in a network actually gets spent in the RAN area. So when we look at Open RAN, the whole idea for us is really about shortening the cycle from incubation to consumption. So when the technology gets incubated by the technology innovators, by the time it takes shape to get into the hands of the consumers or enterprises to use it, we typically have a long 3 to 5 year lead cycle. There are standard specifications that absolutely have to be done. There is a development from a product perspective that has to be done, and there is a integration and a deployment that has to be done and scale, and that's a very long cycle. And then how do we get the feature functionalities added at a faster pace? So the idea of the Open RAN is really not just about making the network as a software, but really drive the fundamental benefits of what we really want to achieve, which is creating a different supply chain ecosystem that we all know, and we understood by now that disruption in a supply chain creates more competition. It allows innovation to come in, and it allows a faster and lower cost of doing things. The deployment becomes easy when it's all virtualized and it's open, so that more players can participate into that, and mix and match can happen. So the deployment and the speed, because it's all software-based, gets much better. The utilization of the assets are much better, because with Open RAN, you can start to pool in the assets that can be shared across different types of utilizations. And then, of course, whenever things happen in the network, being a software-based network, it's a lot more easier to be able to debug, being able to figure it out remotely, and it reduces the time significantly in terms of what it takes to get the network back up if there are certain issues going on. Also manage the life cycle of that network at a much faster pace, so you can introduce the features at a much faster pace at the end of the day. right? And the service creation becomes even more interesting. And that's where we are talking about in this new world of Open RAN, where we have non-real-time break and XAPs starting to come in, where it just enables the smaller modules of the innovation to exist, and anybody can start to build competitive capabilities to create that differentiation, create that use cases that allows a better way and a more efficient way for the operators to consume or use and deploy, and for the consumers to consume. So I think, without spending too much time on the benefits of the Open RAN, it's a very well accepted phenomena now that anything that you make software and open has its benefits. Anything that becomes multi-party open ecosystem gives a very long-term benefits from a total cost of ownership point of view. So that benefits are very well established. However, the question remains as to what is the right way and how is the fastest way that we can get this new architecture, if you may, to be deployed and get commercially ready for everyone to consume. And these are the kind of 4 categories of the challenges that we are really focused on addressing as they are the most important ones. Number one is really about, once you disrupt the supply chain ecosystem, how do you bring in the multiple people and be able to integrate together so that they still work cohesively as a one system? That's challenge number one. Challenge number two is really, as Gabby was saying earlier, is that 95% or majority of the existing operations are existing brownfield operations. So introducing a new architecture needs to coexist with an existing implementations, and hence how you integrate with that and how do you coexist with that such that the user experience is common is very important challenge. Number three is really the accountability of the system performance. At the end of the day, the consumers measure the service from a operators as a system. And while we create a multitudes of supply chain partners in terms of making the architecture available, the accountability to make sure that the end-to-end system is performing is very important, and that's really an important place to decide how we tackle that as we go forward. And the third one is really, anything open can be open only if the interfaces across the different modules are very well defined and are implemented in a way that they actually accomplish the plug-and-play model. So from our perspective, we kind of see these 4 challenges, and we are very focused on addressing these 4 challenges as we go forward. And practically what that means is it requires 2 categories of expertise to become available. One category of expertise is the technology innovation itself. The folks like Intel and Altiostar, my colleagues here on this session, who very aggressively focusing on creating a state-of-the-art new way, new innovation in terms of feature functionalities of the products and the platforms. The second set of expertise that's required is being able to put them together as a solution, as a system, and being able to integrate and take it into the operator's operations environment so that it's very seamlessly flowing in as an end-to-end solution and an end-to-end system, rather than a multiple independent components that somehow cohesively exist, but it has to be very tightly integrated. And that's the very set of expertise. And we believe that the way we are approaching the market, along with our partners like Intel and Altiostar, is able to put that ecosystem together and create the real objectives for the customers, which is really about being able to scale the deployment, being able to really drive the cost of ownership down so that their TCO and the cost is lower, the velocity of getting new feature functionalities, as well as the deployment getting much faster, as well as keep the network future ready so that as new features, we are not going to end at 5G. Our generations are continuously going to change, and they're going to change at a much faster pace. So how do you keep this architecture ready to be able to come in and start integrating and getting more and more features on that? And the way we are kind of approaching this space is really looking at from an end-to-end system perspective. So we really think of this as unlike a traditional model where it was all waterfall, it's more like a DevOps approach of taking, if you look at from the left, which is the technology innovation, that's what we call as a incubation stage. Somebody comes with an idea and say that this is the new feature we can build or new capability we can build, all the way to the operations on the right side, and things should flow seamlessly into that. And that's what we call as a continuous integration. And that's the role that we are really focused on doing it. And we think the Open RAN is ready to go. And I'm really excited to spend next 45 minutes discussing how we are going to be ready with that. Back to you, Gabriel.
Fabulous. Thanks for that introduction, Manish. So we're now going to turn to the panel discussion. Had 2 or 3 good questions in already. Thank you. So keep those coming. And if I could ask the other speakers to turn their cameras and microphones on, we should see the camera views change on your screen in just a moment as our operator puts it to a grid view. Now, the way this works, I have some prepared talking points, which I'm going to put to the panel. I'm also going to work in your questions as we go through, and hopefully they'll be roughly at the right place, but you know how these things go. So with that, I just wanted to start and get an update on the state of play. Now, I know, Manish, we heard from you first, but I just want to stick with you for a moment. Give us a sense of where you think things are. And let me put it, if I may, and I don't know if this is fair or not, I'll put it in these terms. When you're head of a global telco business at Tech Mahindra, it's a very large company with many kind of business lines, telecom being one of them, and then within telecom, Open RAN is only one of the opportunities you have. When you're assessing the landscape, how high of a priority is Open RAN for you, and how much you're going to kind of put your hand up at the board meeting or whatever to say, look, let's get behind this one versus, what, there's tons of digital transformation projects in telco we can do, or there's this or there's that.
No, absolutely, and this is absolutely one of the very, very top priorities for us, not only for the network, but also for the company, because the applications of the Open RAN is not just, it's in itself, it's just about RAN, it's really about transformation across the telco industry as well as the enterprises. So when we look at the Open RAN from a perspective of what an Open RAN can enable as part of the digital transformation journey for the operators to become a digital operators and digital carriers as they design everything for the future, as well as for the enterprises to use the radio network technology to build on top of it all the digital use cases as part of their digital transformation journey. So for us, it's very, very synergistic. And we believe, and one of the reasons why we put this into the top of our priority is because it's really addressing one of the very large areas of pain point and the spend for the customers. And hence it is not only transformative from a cost transformation point of view, but it will be fundamentally transformative in terms of bringing the agility for the telco industry that is really aligns with how the rest of the world has evolved in terms of the way it takes for the features and functions to become available. So it is by far one of the top priorities for us, and we are invested very heavy in it, and we are working with a whole lot of customers actually globally in making this happen as we speak.
Okay, good stuff. We're going to come back to that cost point actually, because we already have a question on that come in just a moment. But before we do that, let's go to Adnan at Intel. To Adnan, as I said in the introduction, you've been involved in this for a long time now. How would you judge, where the industry collectively is now at the start of at the mid of 21?
Yeah, so I kind of joined Intel in this journey back in February 2014. I think back in those days, it was the concept of running and having an Open RAN where you have disaggregated hardware and software solutions, moving away from maybe custom baseband platform was probably a twinkle in the future in terms of making that a reality. But certainly over the last few years, kind of a lot of the work that went into the industry with Intel enabling a lot of different technologies, I think we have reached a point where a lot of the requirements to make Open RAN a reality has actually come around. And if you look at where the industry is today, essentially you have all the major vendors who are now offering Open RAN/vRAN solutions. That covers obviously Altiostar plus other vendors in the ecosystem. So it has become widely adopted by all the ecosystem of vendors. Same thing if you look at the operators. In the early days with operators, they did a very early field trials, if you remember, in the days of doing things in Brazil, as an example, a few years ago with the likes of Telefonica. But as things have moved on, it really has become mainstream. We had obviously Rakuten who launched it as a pure Greenfield network. Verizon, last year, they announced their first virtualized call as well. So really, if you look at that and how both Greenfield and Brownfield deployments has actually happened, and now the wider operator landscape is also adopting this and doing different things within announcements and bringing kind of timelines for the introduction to the network, I think that has really moved on big time versus where we were a few years ago. So really, all in all, I think the whole ecosystem is adopting this, and the good thing is it's not only been adopted for the macro solutions, it's also been adopted for the small cell solutions. Specifically, if you look into regions like in China as an example, a lot of the work that they've been doing there on small cells is actually following the Open RAN principles. So that's also good to see that you're able to kind of use the same technologies, the same methodologies to enable both segments of the market.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. And if I may add, now, is there anything that's kind of over these few years that has sort of surprised you or has changed, or is it kind of tracking to the original kind of concept and plan you saw 6-7 years ago? Is there anything you've gone, I didn't expect it that, or that's kind of surprised me?
I mean, the assumption is always going to be that if you're bringing in a new technology, and typically new technology introduction does take its time, so it was never going to be a kind of an overnight scenario, and there's always a lot of work to be done to kind of show how certain things can be done. And to be honest, if you look at the overall network, I mean, in the baseband network, I think this is what I think Manish indicated in the beginning, is that the baseband or the signal processing side of Open RAN is probably the tougher ones to kind of really solve for the entire industry. Because typically, if you're doing the higher layers, I mean, that is kind of understood, that runs on standard CPUs, but the ability to run even the physical layer or the layer 1 on GPP platforms like COTS hardware, I think that was going to take some time to be at a level that both vendors can see the value of doing it this way, and plus operators are happy with it. So, I mean, I expect it to take this time. Could it be faster? Potentially a bit more, but everything takes time. I mean, this journey happened in the core network, also took many, many years, and I think we are in that same journey now for the RAN space. And I think where things are today, I think it's very, very encouraging. I think it's very, very good, and we're looking forward to continuing the journey over the next couple of years as well.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. I mean, I'll just give a personal view. I think the thing that surprised me most is the way that Open RAN has become a kind of a policy issue in governments, in some countries anyway. If I think back 3 or 4 years, I didn't really think we'd have FCC. Well, we don't have any policy or regulation as such, but the fact that it's on the agenda in Ofcom in the UK, FCC in the US, that's a surprise to me. I hadn't expected that, and we'll see what that comes out to make a difference in time.
Actually, that is true. There's a lot of funded programs actually that are funding on the assumption there's going to be Open RAN principles deployed. So that is true.
Yeah, there's a couple, especially in the US and UK, as it happens, but perhaps elsewhere as well. Anil, at Altiostar, what's your assessment? And obviously, I'm sure everyone knows, but Altiostar is the technology in the Rakuten network, which I think is by far the biggest vRAN, Open RAN style network worldwide. What's your judgment?
So I think I agree with what Manish and Adnan said. So adding on top of what they said, my point is that, I mean, if you see today, right, there are thousands of sites that are deployed using Open RAN principles, and those are deployed across 4G, 5G, macro, and small cells. So overall, I would say there has been tremendous progress in terms of Open RAN technology maturity on various key indicators, right? Number of sites, technologies, and added to that, the number of vendors that have now come in the ecosystem. If you look at the RU itself, I mean, there are 10 plus ORU vendors, and they are providing RUs that address massive MIMO, macro, and even small cell deployments. So in a nutshell, I mean, yes, with Open RAN, there is tremendous multi-vendor collaboration that is happening, and that is leading to Open RAN gaining traction at a very high pace.
Okay, good stuff. I'm going to stick with you, actually, because we had the first question that came in. I know you're probably not going to like the question, or you won't mind it, but answer it how you will. I'll ask it as it's written here. So the question is, any comments about the cost, not mentioned, of Open RAN? In the FCC Widelity report, it said that the cost is similar traditional RAN. When can a true cost actually be presented? And I think it's referring to the FCC commissioned report, and they kind of did some research and said, more or less, it's more or less like for like traditional and Open RAN in terms of equipment cost at any rate. Now, I have a lot of sympathy with the people doing it. It's very difficult to get pricing information. It varies so widely between large-scale deployments and small-scale purchasing and so forth. Very, very difficult thing to do and get consistency, and it changes so much and so forth. But what are your thoughts there, Anil?
So, sure, Gabriel. I mean, as you rightly said, right, it all depends on what methodology has been used to arrive at that conclusion. So based on our experience, what we have seen is that with Open RAN, obviously, margin stacking is avoided, and we have seen that there is 30 to 40% reduction in capex and opex as well. And I mean, again, Open RAN decision should not be based on TCO. Definitely plays an important role, but over and above that, Open RAN also brings accelerated innovation. And it provides operators an ability to distinguish, their networks from the competition, right, through bespoke algorithms and so on. Yeah. So the decisions, I think, should not be purely driven by cost itself. These other factors also have to be taken into consideration by the operators.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you a chance to come back on this in a minute. I'm just going to turn to Manish, because you mentioned cost in your remarks as well, Manish. What is it about Open RAN that makes it less expensive, or if you want to, put it in a more friendly terms, greater value or something like that? I mean, an RU is an RU, a tower is a tower, an antenna is an antenna kind of thing. A coax cable or a fiber cable is what it is. Why? What is it that makes Open RAN somehow less expensive?
No, I think we look at it from a total cost of ownership perspective. That has a capital cost associated with it, buying the system, and then there is an operating cost associated with it from a duration of, let's say, if you plan for what it takes to operate a RAN, traditional RAN versus an Open RAN in the next 3 to 5 years time frame. And when we look at that, we basically say that from a capex perspective, there are certain things that are common across, whether it's an Open RAN or whether it's a traditional RAN architecture. Like you said, site is a site is a site. The cost of a lease of a site is not drastically going to change. However, if the amount of equipment that you put on that site reduces, then there is a change in terms of how the operating cost looks like it. So there is a capital cost associated with it, where we believe that opening the ecosystem and by disrupting the supply chain creates new innovative options available, and that predominantly in every industry that we have seen drives the cost down. So definitely believe that there is a cost of pure, capital equipment on a per site basis. When you look at it in Open RAN versus a traditional RAN, it will be different. Now, it can come in a lot of different forms and fashion when it's get done, but the cost of a radio network on a per site basis is absolutely going down, and Open RAN is triggering a lot of that at that point of time. It's not just about technology, but it's triggering that entire supply chain disruption. The second part, which to us is actually more exciting, is the operating part of it, which is, one of the examples we take is that when you have a technician visit a site to be able to do the configuration and the provisioning, and if the site is down, to be able to manage it, if the controls of that is all remotely managed, and you are able to do it very, very much like you will manage the software updates on any of that, you can avoid a significant amount of operating expenses in terms of how you service that site at that point of time. So when we look at the operating cost of operating an Open RAN site versus a non-Open RAN site, it is definitely a huge difference. You won't get that on day one with one site. The scale has to come in, and as the scale becomes more and more with the Open RAN, it will absolutely drive the operating cost of that. And that's how we look at it, 3 to 5 years total cost of ownership. And that is precisely to Anil's point, 30 to 40% is precisely the numbers that we have seen as well in terms of the total cost of ownership. But I just want to restate that one point, Gabriel, and that is also that, when you look at just one cost element is one thing, but what does it cost to add you new features and functionalities in that network is a very different conversation. So I believe that once the network becomes software and all the features are software centric, you can actually make a lot more new features available at a much lower cost, and hence you forecast all the new things that you have to add into that radio network. Your total cost of ownership, even from a feature functionality cost perspective, will significantly go down.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good points. We'll come back. I'm actually going to move on to the next talking about. By the way, going back to Anil's point, 10 new OR or ORU vendors coming in is a big difference from in terms of things that have changed over the last few years. I think that is a great point. I'm going to come back, keep on this cost point, but I'm going to move to Adnan now at Intel. It's kind of somewhat related anyway. And Adnan, I wanted to get your view here on the first question on the slide. And my question here is there sufficient commonality in Open RAN technology platforms to generate economies of scale that are competitive with integrated RAN? And the basis of this question is, I hear from a number of operators is, in principle, we like the kind of savings that Manish and Anil have been talking about, but right now there's kind of 6 ways of doing Open RAN, and we don't know quite which one to go with. Adnan.
Yep. So it is good in the early days of a new technology to kind of help the ecosystem maybe have some more common profiles and maybe something that is a bit more defined. And you're right. I mean, when you're doing, in reality, if you do an Open RAN network, you could have so many variants of the RU vendors with so many different bands. Same thing with the platforms. The platform could be for a CRAN, could be for a DRAN, even small cells, as I mentioned. And then you have the various mixes of the softwares that could be hosted for both the DU, the CU, etc. So I think sometimes it's good to see really the end customers, so the comm service providers, provide some kind of, maybe a consolidated view of what they're looking to do and what they want the ecosystem to provide. I think a good example of this was, if you see what was published in the TIP organization that was done by 5 European operators, that they actually came together and put together a kind of a requirements document that went through all the various components of what they're looking for in the network. And it was an Open RAN compliant set of kind of milestones and feature sets. And these things cover everything from the RU, with the different RU bands that they're looking for, the DU hardware requirements from high capacity and different configurations, all the way to the cloud infrastructure. So this is the software that runs on these equipment. And they were very good also in actually how they kind of indicated for each item, was this something that was needed by all the operators or most of the operators. I think it was a nice blueprint to show the vendors of kind of, if you want to have like a common set of requirements that you build your products towards, I think that was a good example of how it could be done. But even outside of that, I think a lot of the other operators now are also providing kind of a lot more, I suppose, clear guidance in terms of their timelines for deployments, what are the key features they need, maybe in the short term versus longer term. So that also helps the vendors put together the right solutions for Open RAN.
Good stuff. What do you think about the other one that occurred to me? I think that 5 operator MOU is a good example. Things like the Avonstar program, which seems to be a kind of I'm going to get this wrong, but essentially it's a common specification for an Open RU, with the idea being that many operators can use the same product.
Yeah, I think that was another good example, because in the case of the Evenstar program, so they were trying to come up with kind of a certain number of bands for a radio, like an outdoor macro radio, that can be compliant to Open RAN, so that operators who are trying to deploy at least have a starting point that they can use. And this was actually going to help for example, let's say certain vendors were not sure what specification to begin with. I think the Evenstar was saying, look, this is a good starting point based on all the analysis that they have done, talking to many operators of what would be a good starting configuration. So that was a real example of gathering a lot of requirements from multiple operators and then putting it into practice in actually building that product to make it easier for the operators to use as well. I think that was a very good example as well.
Yeah, good stuff. And then Anil at Altiostar, your thoughts on this? Do we need a common technology platforms, as it were, or actually can with a software-driven approach, can you kind of skate across different environments?
So I think, first of all, what I want to say is that from our perspective, commonality I would define commonality as the availability of standard interfaces between the different disaggregated components. That's the most important part. So that is already being driven through forums such as ORAN. And already, we are seeing the impact of that resulting in, separation of ORUs from ODUs, and then, development of platforms such as near real-time break and non-real-time break. So that is one thing. And then on the platform side, as Adnan mentioned, TIP, for example, has been driving these reference designs for RUs and DUs. And so all that is accelerating the process of even having common open RAN technology platforms. And all this definitely is bringing the economies of scales.
Yeah, okay. What about, and I think Adnan, he was exemplary in referring to GPP platforms earlier, as well as the FlexRAN that he's involved in. What do you think about the different silicon platforms? Do the software suppliers such as yourself have enough agility to, I don't know if we should give names, but for example, deploy on an x86 and a Graviton or some other, the many companies we could talk about. I take your point that open interfaces are the main thing, but it's also the implementation on the different technology platforms does make a difference.
So sure. Intel obviously started this whole process, and Intel has done a tremendous amount of work. We work very closely with Intel, but other silicon vendors will also emerge. And as Altiostar, definitely, as and when those solutions are coming to the market, we will be working with those solutions.
Okay, let's move on to the 5G part. I wanted to get, let's stay with you, Anil, while we're here. What's the status of the 5G Open RAN products and solutions now, given that most of Open and vRAN is 4G today? And by the way, let me just give another kind of, someone's written in a question here, I might as well put it in at the same time. More or less to the point that, can't quite find it, but more or less to the point that operators around the world are letting big 5G contracts already with traditional RAN vendors. How does Open RAN intersect into that market dynamic? Okay,
so first of all, in terms of the pace of 5G Open RAN deployment, what we are seeing is that 5G Open RAN deployments are taking place at a faster pace compared to 4G Open RAN. Rakuten has already rolled out 5G in both sub-6 and millimeter wave spectrums using Altiostar's Open RAN technology. And then similarly, we have ongoing contracts and deployments for 5G networks in US and Europe. And these networks are expected to go on air soon. The point or the comment that audience has made about 5G contracts being given away to traditional RAN vendors, my only comment here would be that it's still early stages for 5G, and operators continue to insert new vendors in their networks. So I believe that we are in the right place, and the 5G Open RAN technology is mature enough to be deployed by operators. And in terms of last point I want to make is that in terms of technology, the networks that we have deployed, they are supporting advanced features like massive MIMO, slicing, Boner, and so on.
Okay, good stuff. Adnan, I didn't tell you your thoughts on the 5G technology development.
Yeah, so I agree with Anil. So if you think of where the network is, so it started off with 4G, and then you went into 5G narrowband, which was kind of really last year. A lot of activity went into 5G narrowband, and maybe in the case of Rakuten, so we're looking at even the 5G massive MIMO. But in 2021, I think a lot of the focus is going to be on the 5G massive MIMO. If you look at a lot of the mid-band or the C-band deployments, a lot of the focus there is going to be on that kind of capability. Now, is the technology ready? So what we typically do, I mean, as a technology provider, is we try to plan ahead. So we have been working on not just the silicon, but the enabling software as well, to make sure our customers and partners can actually enable such things as massive MIMO, for example, on our platforms. And even we kind of looked at other requirements that typically come with when you're deploying a 5G network or a 4G network. So for example, the ability to do DSS, so dynamic spectrum sharing as an example. So really, we always try to kind of plan ahead by working with both the vendors and the comm service providers to put the right ingredients and building blocks into both our software and make sure that that software then is running as optimally as possible on the hardware. And that is kind of something we have been doing and continue to do to make sure that the technology is up to the task of delivering the right products that the network needs from meeting the customer requirements, and the vendors then can supply that into the operators.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. 2 or 3 questions have come in about the massive MIMO and the summarizing them do you have enough processing power for these mid-band massive MIMO high occupied bandwidth systems, basically, and do you need hardware accelerators? What's the status of that right now? I mean, again, there's different architectures for acceleration as well, which is one of the things about fragmentation possibly to think of.
Yeah, so I can answer this first if you want. So basically,
yeah, please.
We have different silicon products that kind of come over the time. So we had something called Cascade Lake for those who know this, and then we have Ice Lake today. So basically, we have been able to enable the right technology at the right time. So massive MIMO is a good example. It is true. It's obviously a lot more demanding than, say, the standard MIMO 20 megahertz 4x4, which existed for the FDD spectrum in most cases, whereas the mid-band technology is typically the 100 megahertz, and more often than not, it's either 32T, 32R, or 64T, 64R, which does bring in a lot more compute complexity. But actually, our CPUs are more than keeping up. So the combination of what we have from technology plus the accompanying software has been able to really come up with the right platform for doing this. Again, we always keep in mind what the operator is looking for, the customer is looking for in terms of the form factor, the overall platform consumption, and we have been able to meet all these requirements and continue to innovate for them. Yes, it is true in some cases we do look at acceleration. So even if you look into the ORAN architectures or even into the Open RAN document that I just referred to previously, I mean, they do have options there. If someone wants to offload maybe something like FEC as an example, that's always an option that can also be supported. And we also have products for this to also make that a reality.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good stuff. I want to turn to Manish at Tech Mahindra now. Manish, Adnan just said our CPUs are more than keeping up. So, good statement, of course. I want to turn to the bottom point on the slide here. Is it realistic to think Open RAN will be the best way to build a RAN? I'm reminded of your very first slide where you talked about the reasons for people to use Open RAN. Ultimately, I guess the basis for this question is the view that it might be good to have Open RAN for vendor diversity or some other reason, but unless it's the better way of doing things, ultimately it's not gonna make it. It's not going to get enough scale. Personally, I would say we have signs that it could become the best way to build a RAN. Not quite a clear line of sight that we're guaranteed that at this point, but it looks promising. I don't know what your thoughts are on that and what sort of time frame we might be thinking on. And by the best, I mean in all if you net out all the different dimensions, it's just better.
Gabriel, absolutely. I think when we look at any technology trend, we look at a couple of fundamentals that drive it. And by the way, this conversation about whether this will become a larger scale deployment or not is very unique to just Open RAN. Every technology transformation that we have seen in the industry in the last 20 years have almost asked the same question every time. We used to live in the world of very custom designed hardware at that point of time, and when the world of COTS hardware started to become more real, everybody questioned that, this custom hardware works just fine, it's fully integrated, you disaggregate it, bring in open platform like COTS. Would it really scale? Would it really do the job? Is it going to perform the way? Absolutely, today we know where that is. We had the same situation with the switching architectures where we said, a class 5, class 4 integrated switches are perfectly fine. Why we want to change it to a soft switch or an IMS-based call control? And what's the benefit of doing that? Because the same voice traffic that we are carrying, does it even make sense to change that kind of an architecture? We can look at the history today and say that where it is, right? We don't see any class 5 switches sold anymore in the market. The same thing we look at 4G, even when I was, I've been part of this industry 23 years. And when the 4G conversation started, it was very similar to say, look, 3G is just fine. The data speeds are reasonably okay. There are not enough applications in the market that really require that kind of a higher speed. Is there a business case to do 4G? The operators took it, say, no, 4G is going to happen. And we saw a completely different smartphone euphoria in the market that drove a whole new paradigm for how the mobile networks are being used. 5G is the same place, right? So where I'm going with that is I see that the fundamental of the Open RAN technology is completely aligned, that it's attacking the two specific problems of creating innovation and driving more openness for people to participate in the innovation cycle, which drives cost. Those two will absolutely drive, I think, in 3 years from now, maybe I'll just put that marker out there, in 3 to 5 years from now, we wouldn't be seeing anything that is a non-Open RAN deployment. Every dollar will get spent towards that. Today, I'm seeing every customer, when they're looking for a spend, they are by far, every RFP that I've seen, one question is very common: does this support Open RAN architecture or not? And if it's not, I suspect that if you don't support an Open RAN architecture, I suspect that it will not be seen as a positive partner from a long-term perspective by any of our customers.
So that's a great sort of time frame you put on it there, 3 to 5 years, give or take a little. Every dollar will go into some form of an Open RAN architecture. Let's just use that as no one's going to hold you to that necessarily, but would the implication of that therefore be that what we think of as the incumbent suppliers today are going to have to also, pretty much move into and adopt Open RAN architectures in their own offers?
My belief is yes. It is going to become a standardized de facto way of deploying the RAN architectures.
Yeah. Okay. Anil at Altiostar, what do you think of that? He's put a marker in there. Brave, and people always shy away from it. But what's your kind of timeline here for when this is the best 5G RAN solution?
I think, as Manish already spoke, right, about the various benefits, and my view is that in addition to those, Open RAN is all about giving control of the network design, operations, deployments, and even algorithms back in the hand of the operators. If you see, Gabriel, the deployments that we have done, right, we don't talk about services for the deployment. Because our operating philosophy has been to simplify the things for the operators, right? If there are repetitive tasks, those should not be done by the humans. Those should be done by the machines and algorithms. So I think, as I said, Open RAN is about giving control back to the operator. And in my view, where we are today, the time for doing Open RAN deployments is now.
Yeah, okay. Adnan, at Intel, care to have a guesstimate on this? It's a terrible question, I know, because everyone's kind of, they're either shy or they're, like Anil, they're kind of, we're ready. Just give us your thoughts on the timeline. Because I guess there's one thing having a product ready and a technology platform ready to it being able to be adopted by the customers and so forth. What's your feel for Open RAN timeline?
I think, the 3 to 5 years looks reasonable. I mean, what I see today is there's obviously certain operators going full steam ahead. They're going with Open RAN, vRAN from day one. And obviously those guys will be continuing and all the networks become Open RAN. So for them, that journey has already begun. I think for others, they're kind of starting maybe slightly different pace, doing maybe certain parts of the network with Open RAN and vRAN. And there's others who are about to join that journey as well. So I think for me, maybe to that 3 to 5 year window, I think that's actually reasonable in terms of, will the majority of operators have it either be part of their network or about to be launched in the network? Actually, as Manish was saying, that whatever they have in the network has to already follow those principles. To me, actually, that sounds pretty reasonable. Because I mean, even if you take maybe a parallel kind of journey that the core network went through, it did take some time for the core network to be in terms of a virtualized implementation in that kind of segment to become the dominant technology. It did take, many, many years to get there. So you can see Open RAN as a journey that began probably more like 2018, 2017 with the early days of what was going on with Telefonica, for example, in Brazil, and then other regions around the world as well. So I think we're kind of in the good phase right now of the Open RAN journey. I think what's going to be encouraging for the operators is when they're seeing what the technology can do, they're seeing kind of their colleagues in the service provider community, the likes of, Verizon or Dish in the US, Rakuten in Japan, Vodafone in Europe, and so on, that they're actually all adopting this technology. They can actually get confidence that this is something that they can also buy into and use it as part of their future planning for equipment deployment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good stuff. That's a decent mark. I'm going to move on because we've only got 10 minutes left, and I've remiss of me really to not leave this on fast.
Sorry, if I just can make a quick comment here, right? The way I hear Adnan saying is, and at least my view is that it's 3 to 5 year comment is not really about the technology maturity, right? So the Open RAN is ready for deployment today. It's the typical technology adoption curve that we are talking about here, where there are early adopters who will adopt a new technology immediately, then there are fence sitters, and then there are going to be followers, right, who will do it in 3 to 5 years. So that would be my comment.
Since I threw the 3 to 5 years, maybe I just qualify that to Anil's point as well, is that what I meant was to give a CFO's perspective. Every CFO in an operator's community will in 3 years say, every dollar that I spend in the radio network, why would it not be on Open RAN, since it has been proven by the time that this technology has scaled, been ready, and it's giving the benefits. So that's where I was coming from, and that will become basically the full-scale deployment that you're talking about from a global perspective. But agree completely with Anil, the technology is ready today, it's getting deployed, it's already deployed actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good stuff. So let's move on. I think that's a good clarification and points well made all round. I want to actually go with Anil again. And many questions have come in about brownfield, how you actually deploy Open RAN into existing networks and so forth. Anil, I wondered if you could first of all tell us, what you've learned in the greenfields that you're involved in, and the brownfields you're involved in, and just how how that helps in brownfield and some of the key issues for the operators. There's a handful of big greenfield operators, but most are still brownfield. How are the lessons you've learned so far? How can you apply them into these other networks? And that's to Anil at Altiostar.
Greenfield deployments have helped us in developing blueprints, right? And these are standardized blueprints which can be components from different vendors can be seamlessly integrated and deployed. And we have developed these one-click blueprints. So these are deployed in fully automated fashion from the core OSS platforms. So that's what we have achieved in greenfield deployments. Now moving on to brownfield deployments. The brownfield deployments typically would involve their existing core radio as well as OSS platforms. And there again, what we have done is that we have done interoperability with multiple different traditional RAN vendors as well as the core platforms on S1 and X2 interfaces. So that way we are able to provide the ability to ensure that there is seamless mobility as well as interoperability with the existing packet core platform of the operator. The last area, which is very, very important, is the integration with the existing OSS platforms of the operators. And there again, to make sure that if operators want to continue to follow their current practices in terms of managing the network, we have made sure that from our platform, we are exposing standardized 3GPP-based IRPs for integration with these OSS platforms, as well as supporting, let's say, some other industry standard protocols like SNMPv3, NetConfig, etc. So, I mean, that's the way we see, the integration and deployment happening in the brownfield, going from greenfield.
And thinking about it just from a RAN and radio point of view, are there particular brownfield scenarios that you see are most popular? For example, would you do I don't really like the word rip and replace, but would you replace a whole geography with a new Open RAN solution? Or would you do, say, a small cell underlay, or I don't know, new 5G spectrum? There's lots of different options. Is there a particular favorite you would advise or that you come across?
It all depends, right? So we have come across different operators, different scenarios, right, with different operators. So there are operators, Gabriel, who are working with us in the approach where they are carving out separate geography for Open RAN deployments. So that is one approach that we are seeing. The second approach that we have come across with a few operators is where what they are doing is that they are dedicating a low or mid-band LT carrier for Open RAN, along with their newly allocated sub-6 wideband NR carrier. So this is the approach that is being taken by operators who want to do NSA deployment, and they want to maintain most of their LT carriers with their traditional RAN vendor, for the time being at least. And then we have also seen scenarios where operators want to deploy Open RAN for 5G SA directly as an overlay, and then over a period of time they plan to reform their LT carriers to NR. So these are the primary scenarios, Gabriel, that we have seen. And now, apart from that, there are other for example, small cell underlays that are also there. But that's not our primary focus, honestly.
Yeah, understood. Anyhow, that's some terrific insight there. Thank you very much. We've actually come pretty much to the end of the session. We've whipped by, and I've got hundreds of questions still to do. But I'd just like to really close it out by thanking the speakers first of all. Anil Bhandari from Altiostar. Thanks. That was some great insights. Thank you for being with us today. Adnan Boustany at Intel. Likewise, Adnan. Didn't get to all the questions. I had a few, but thanks for coming and speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then to Manish Mangal at Tech Mahindra. Thank you also, Manish.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. And thank you, everyone.
With that, I'm going to close the session just by thanking everybody in the audience for attending and participating. Sorry if we didn't get to your question. I think we got to a lot of them obliquely somehow. But thank you very much for coming, and goodbye.